The rain battered the windows of our old farmhouse, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding in my chest. I sat in my worn armchair, the one Margaret always hated, staring at the woman I'd loved for nearly 50 years. At 70, my hands were rough from decades of labor, my face lined with the weight of a life hard-earned. Margaret, still striking at 68, stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed, her lips tight. The air between us crackled with something I couldn't name, something that had been building for months, maybe years. "Henry," she said, her voice low, almost swallowed by the storm outside. "I need to tell you something." I leaned forward, my bad knee creaking as I shifted. "What is it?" "Maggie." My voice was softer than I meant it to be, betraying the hope I still clung to. Even now. She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she stared into the fire, the flames casting shadows across her face. "I've been seeing someone else," she said, each word a stone dropping into the quiet. "For 2 years." The room seemed to tilt. My breath caught, sharp and jagged, like I'd swallowed glass. "What?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "His name's Richard," she continued, her tone flat, as if she were reciting a grocery list. "He's a lawyer in town. Successful. Charming. Everything you're not." I blinked, the words slicing deeper than I thought possible. "Everything I'm not," I echoed, my voice cracking. "Maggie, we've been married 47 years. We built this life together, this house, the farm, everything. And you're telling me it's not enough?" Her eyes finally met mine, cold and unyielding. "It's not about the farm, Henry. It's about me. I deserve more. I need a man worth more." The words hung in the air, venomous and final. I felt something inside me break, not just my heart, but something deeper, something foundational. The man I'd been steady, loyal, hard-working crumbled under the weight of her disdain. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked fields I'd toiled over for decades. This land, this life, had been for her. For us. Why now? I asked, my back to her. "Why tell me now?" "Because I'm leaving," she said simply. "Richard's waiting. I'm done pretending." I turned, my chest tight with a mix of rage and sorrow. Pretending. All these years, Maggie, was it all pretend? She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her coat from the back of the sofa and walked toward the door. "I'll be at Richard's," she said. "We'll figure out the rest later." The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing in the empty house. I stood there, alone, the storm outside raging as fiercely as the one inside me. For hours, I didn't move. I thought of our life together, the laughter, the struggles, the quiet moments when we'd sit on the porch, her hand in mine, watching the sunset. I thought of the vows we'd made, the promises I'd kept. And I thought of her words, "I need a man worth more." By dawn, the rain had stopped, and something new stirred in me. Not just pain, but resolve. If Margaret thought I was worth so little, I'd show her what I was capable of. I'd take everything she thought she could walk away with, everything she valued, and leave her with nothing but the truth of what she'd thrown away. I walked to my desk, a sturdy oak piece I'd built myself, and pulled out the old ledger where we kept our financial records. The farm, the savings, the investments, everything was in both our names. But I'd been the one to build it, to nurture it. If she wanted to leave, she'd leave with nothing but her regrets. I spent the morning making calls. First to our lawyer, then to the bank. I wasn't a vindictive man, but her words had lit a fire in me. I'd spent my life giving her everything, and now she'd spat on it. If she wanted a man worth more, I'd show her the worth of the man she'd betrayed. By noon, I had a plan. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice, about reclaiming what was mine. I'd worked the land, poured my sweat into it, while she'd grown restless, chasing something I could never be. I thought of Richard, the lawyer, with his polished suits and city charm. I didn't know him, but I hated him. Not for taking her, but for making her believe I was less. The phone rang, startling me. It was our daughter, Emily, her voice tight with worry. "Dad, Mom just called me. She said she's leaving you. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, the weight of explaining this to our children settling on my shoulders. "She's made her choice, Em," I said, "but I'm not done yet." "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It means I'm taking back what's mine," I said, my voice steady for the first time in hours. "And she's going to learn what worth really means." I hung up, my hands shaking but my mind clear. The farm was mine. The life we'd built was mine. And if Margaret thought she could walk away with half of it, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and quiet determination. The farmhouse, once filled with the warmth of shared meals and laughter, now felt like a hollow shell. I moved through it like a ghost, my purpose keeping me upright when grief threatened to pull me under. Margaret's absence was a wound, but her words, "I need a man worth more," were the fuel that kept me moving. I met with our lawyer, Tom, in his cramped office downtown. He was a grizzled man in his 60s, with a no-nonsense demeanor I'd always respected. I laid out the situation, sparing no detail. His eyebrows shot up when I got to the part about Richard, but he didn't interrupt. "So, what do you want to do, Henry?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "I want to protect what's mine," I said, my voice steady. "The farm, the savings, everything. She doesn't get to walk away with half after what she's done." Tom nodded, scribbling notes. "Divorce laws in this state are tricky. It's a no-fault jurisdiction, so her infidelity won't automatically sway the court. But we can argue for an equitable distribution based on your contributions to the marriage. The farm's been in your family for generations, right? Since my great-grandfather," I said. "I've worked it my whole life." She helped. "Sure, but it was my sweat, my blood." "We'll build a case around that," Tom said. "And the savings? You've got records of your earnings." "Every penny," I said. "I kept the books." She never cared about the numbers. Tom gave me a long look, his eyes softening. "This is going to be tough, Henry. Not just legally, but emotionally. You sure you're ready for it?" I thought of Margaret's cold stare, her dismissive words. "I'm ready," I said. She made her choice. Now I'm making mine. Back at the farm, I threw myself into work. The fields needed tending, and the physical labor kept my mind from spiraling. As I repaired a fence under the blazing sun, I thought about our life together. Margaret had been my partner, my confidant, for so long. We'd faced droughts, financial struggles, the loss of our first child before Emily was born. I'd thought we were unbreakable. But somewhere along the way, she'd started to see me as less exciting, less ambitious, less worthy. I remembered the early days, when we were young and broke, dreaming of a future together. She'd loved the farm then, loved the simplicity of it. But as the years wore on, she'd grown restless. She'd started going to town more often, joining book clubs and charity boards. chasing a life that felt bigger than the one we'd built. I thought it was just a phase. I'd been wrong. Emily came by that evening, her face pale with worry. She was 42 now, with 2 kids of her own, but she still looked like the little girl who'd run through the fields, chasing fireflies. "Dad," she said, sitting at the kitchen table. "I talked to Mom. She's different. Like she's someone else." "She's been someone else for a while," I said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "I just didn't see it." "She told me about Richard," Emily said, her voice breaking. "She said he makes her feel alive. I don't understand how she could do this to you." I sat across from her, my hands wrapped around my own mug. "It's not just about me, Em. It's about her. She thinks she's found something better, but she's throwing away everything we built." "Are you going to fight her?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "I'm not fighting her," I said. "I'm fighting for what's right. She doesn't get to take half of this farm just because she's decided I'm not enough." Emily reached for my hand, her grip tight. "I'm on your side, Dad. Whatever you need." Her support meant more than I could say. That night, I sat down with the ledger again, going over every asset, every investment. Margaret had never cared about the details, but I'd always been meticulous. The farm was worth more than she realized. Land values had skyrocketed in recent years. The savings account, too, was substantial, built from years of careful planning. I'd been frugal, always thinking of our future. Her future. Now, I'd use that against her. I called Tom the next morning with a list of everything I wanted protected. "File the papers," I said. "I want to move fast." "You're sure?" he asked. "Once we start, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said, my voice hard. "She wants a man worth more. Let's see how much she's worth when I'm done." A week later, Margaret came back to the farmhouse. I was in the barn, mending a tractor, when I saw her car pull up. She stepped out, dressed in a sharp blazer and heels, looking more like a city woman than the farmer's wife I'd known. Richard was with her, a tall man with slicked back hair and a smug smile. My stomach churned, but I kept my face blank as they approached. "Henry," Margaret said, her tone clipped. "We need to talk about the divorce." I wiped my hands on a rag, taking my time. "Talk. Then." Richard stepped forward, extending a hand I didn't take. "I'm Richard," he said, his voice smooth. "I'm here to help Margaret through this." "You're here to take what's not yours," I said, my eyes locked on his. "But go ahead. Say what you came to say." Margaret's jaw tightened. "I want my share of the farm. The savings. Everything. Half. Henry. That's fair." "Fair." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the barn. "You think you can cheat on me, walk out, and take half of what I built? That's not how this works." Richard put a hand on her arm, like he was calming a child. "Let's keep this civil," he said. "We can settle this in court if we have to." "Oh, we will," I said. "But you're not getting what you think. I've already talked to my lawyer. The farm's in my family's name. The savings. Mostly my earnings. You want to fight for it, Maggie? You'll lose." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You can't do this, Henry. I put my life into this marriage, too." "Your life?" I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "I worked the fields while you went to your fancy luncheons. I paid the bills while you bought dresses you didn't need. And I stayed faithful while you ran off with him." I jerked my head toward Richard, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. Margaret's face paled, but she didn't back down. "You're nothing without me," she said. "You're just an old farmer who never amounted to anything." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. "If I'm nothing," I said, "then why do you want half of what I've got?" She didn't answer. Richard tugged at her arm, muttering something about leaving. As they walked back to the car, I called after her. "You'll hear from my lawyer, Maggie, and you'll see what I'm worth." That night, I sat on the porch, the stars bright above the fields. I thought about what she'd say to nothing without me and felt a spark of defiance. I wasn't nothing. I was Henry Thompson, a man who'd built a life from the ground up, who'd loved fiercely and worked tirelessly. She'd underestimated me, and that was her mistake. The next day, Tom called with good news. "We've got a strong case," he said. "The farm's history is in your favor, and the financial records back you up. She'll get something, but it won't be half." "Keep pushing," I said. "I want her to feel this." I wasn't proud of the bitterness in my voice, but I couldn't help it. Margaret had torn apart everything I believed in. I'd loved her with everything I had, and she'd thrown it back in my face. Now, I'd make sure she understood the cost of her choices. Emily came by again, bringing her kids this time. They ran through the fields, their laughter a brief respite from the weight I carried. "Dad," she said, sitting beside me, "are you okay?" "Really?" I looked out at the land, the rows of corn swaying in the breeze. "I will be," I said. "This farm, this life, it's mine, and I'm not letting her take it." She hugged me, her arms tight around my shoulders. "You're stronger than she knows," she whispered. I hoped she was right, because the fight was just beginning, and I wasn't about to lose. The courtroom was cold, the kind of sterile chill that seeps into your bones. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded, my suit stiff and unfamiliar. At 70, I hadn't worn a tie in years, but Tom had insisted I look the part. Across the room, Margaret sat beside Richard, her face composed but her eyes darting nervously. She looked out of place here, like a stranger in her own life. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun, called the session to order. Tom stood, laying out our case with calm precision. He detailed the farm's history, my family's legacy, my years of labor. He presented the financial records, showing how I'd been the primary breadwinner, how Margaret had contributed little to the farm's upkeep in recent years. He didn't mention her affair. Tom had warned me it wouldn't carry much weight, but he painted a picture of a man who'd given everything to a marriage that had been discarded. Margaret's lawyer, a sharp young woman hired by Richard, argued for an equal split. Mrs. Thompson dedicated her life to this marriage, she said. She supported her husband emotionally, managed the household, and deserves her fair share. I wanted to laugh. Manage the household. Margaret had hired cleaners years ago, spent more time at social events than in the kitchen. But I kept my face neutral, letting Tom handle the rebuttal. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "Your Honor," I said, "I'm not a man of fancy words. I'm a farmer. I built that farm with my hands, my sweat, my life. It's been in my family for generations. My wife, she chose to walk away. She chose another man, said I wasn't worth enough. I'm not here to punish her, but I won't let her take what I've earned." The room was silent when I sat down. Margaret's eyes were on me, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Not yet. The hearing dragged on for days, each side presenting evidence, witnesses, arguments. Emily testified on my behalf, her voice breaking as she described my dedication to the family, to the farm. Margaret's friends spoke for her, painting her as a devoted wife who'd simply fallen out of love. It was a lie, but a polished one. On the final day, the judge delivered her ruling. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "the court recognizes your significant contributions to the marital assets. The farm, being a family inheritance, will remain in your sole possession. The savings will be divided, with 60% awarded to you and 40% to Mrs. Thompson. Additional assets, including the house, will be split equally." It wasn't everything I'd wanted, but it was enough. The farm was mine. The bulk of the savings was mine. Margaret would walk away with less than she'd hoped, and that felt like justice. Outside the courthouse, she approached me, Richard trailing behind. "You happy now, Henry?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You got what you wanted." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. Her beauty was still there, but it was hollow now, overshadowed by her choices. "I didn't want this, Maggie," I said. "You did." She turned away, and Richard followed, his arm around her like a shield. I watched them go, feeling a strange mix of triumph and loss. I'd won the farm, but I'd lost the woman I'd loved for half a century. Back at the farmhouse, I walked the fields, the earth solid beneath my feet. This was my home, my legacy. Margaret had tried to take it, but I'd held firm. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. The months that followed were quiet, but not empty. The farm demanded my attention, and I threw myself into it, finding solace in the rhythm of the seasons. I hired a new hand, a young man named Jake, who reminded me of myself at 20, eager, hardworking, full of dreams. He didn't ask about Margaret, and I didn't tell him. The past was a weight I carried alone. Emily and her kids visited often, filling the house with noise and life. Her husband, Mark, helped with repairs, and we spent evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. They were my anchor, my reason to keep going. But at night, when the house was silent, I'd sit with a glass of whiskey, staring at the empty chair where Margaret used to sit. I didn't miss her, not the woman she'd become, but I missed the idea of her, the life we'd planned. I started going to town more, something I'd avoided for years. I joined a veterans group, sharing stories with men who'd seen their own battles, on and off the field. They understood loss, understood betrayal. One of them, a retired mechanic named Sam, became a friend. Over coffee, he'd talk about his own divorce, his own rebuilding. "You don't get over it," he said once. "You just get through it." I took his words to heart. I wasn't trying to erase Margaret from my life, that was impossible. But I could build something new, something that was mine alone. I started small, a new coat of paint for the farmhouse, a garden where Margaret's roses had withered. I even bought a new truck, something I'd put off for years because she'd called it a waste. One day, Emily brought me a letter. It was from Margaret, forwarded from her new address in town. My hands shook as I opened it, unsure what to expect. "Henry, I don't expect you to forgive me, and I'm not asking you to. I was wrong, not just about Richard, but about you. I see that now. He's not what I thought, and I'm not who I thought I was. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I'm sorry. For everything. Margaret." I read it twice, then set it aside. Part of me wanted to crumple it, to burn it and let the ashes scatter. But another part, the part that still remembered the girl I'd married, felt a pang of pity. She'd chased something she thought was better, only to find it hollow. I didn't wish her pain, but I didn't owe her my forgiveness either. I wrote back. A single line. I hope you find what you're looking for. Maggie. But it won't be with me. I mailed it and felt lighter. Like I'd shed a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The farm was thriving. The harvest better than it had been in years. Jake and I worked side by side, and I found myself teaching him the way my father had taught me. It wasn't just about the land, it was about legacy, about passing something on. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on the porch with Emily. You did it, Dad, she said, her voice soft. You kept the farm. You kept yourself. I had to, I said, looking out at the fields. It's who I am. And it was. I was Henry Thompson, a man who'd loved, lost, and fought for what mattered. Margaret had tried to define my worth, but I'd defined it myself. A year after the divorce, the farm was unrecognizable. Not in its bones, the fields, the barn, the old oak by the creek were the same, but in its spirit. I'd poured myself into it, and it had given back. The harvest was bountiful. The new garden bloomed with colors Margaret would have envied. And the farmhouse felt like home again, not just a battleground of memories. I heard through Emily that Margaret had left Richard. He'd moved on to someone younger, someone new, and she was alone now, living in a small apartment in town. Part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. Her choices were her own, and I'd made peace with mine. The veterans group became a second family. Sam and I started a project, fixing up old tractors for local farmers who couldn't afford new ones. It wasn't just about the war kit, it was about giving back, about finding purpose in the years I had left. The younger guys looked up to me, called me Pops, and I found myself smiling more than I had in years. One spring morning, as I walked the fields with Jake, he asked me about the farm's history. I told him about my great-grandfather, who'd cleared the land with nothing but a mule and a dream. I told him about my father, who'd taught me to love the soil. And I told him about myself, about the man who'd almost lost it all but hadn't. You're a hell of a man, Henry, Jake said, clapping me on the shoulder. This place eats you. I looked out at the land, the rows of green stretching to the horizon. He was right. This place was me. Not just the farm, but the life I'd built, the man I'd become. Margaret had tried to take that from me, had tried to tell me I was worth less. But she was wrong. That evening, Emily and her family came for dinner. The kids ran through the fields, their laughter echoing in the twilight. Mark helped me grill, and Emily set the table, her smile bright. As we ate, I looked around at the faces I loved, at the home I'd fought for. This was worth more than Margaret could ever understand. Later, as I sat on the porch, the stars bright above, I thought about her letter, about her apology. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't love her, either. She was part of my past, but she didn't define my future. I was Henry Thompson, a man who'd faced betrayal and come out stronger. A man who'd built a life, not just for himself, but for those he loved. A man worth more than she'd ever know. And as the crickets sang and the breeze carried the scent of earth, I knew one thing for certain: I was enough.